Joan made an explicit film she regretted, a private reel passed around like currency. And when the fixer knocked, the pregnancy was erased. And today, we're about to uncover 18 stars destroyed by secrets they couldn't outrun. Joan Crawford, the shame. She scrubbed away before the Oscars, before the ice-cold feud. She was just Lucille Le Sueur, a hungry girl with too much ambition and nowhere to put it. In her desperation, she made a film. Not for MGM, not for theaters, a silent reel known only by whispers, The Casting Couch. It allegedly showed a young Crawford playing a naive actress seduced into earning her big break. The camera was real. The men behind it? Powerful, unofficial. And when it was over, the footage was passed around behind closed doors like a dirty secret Hollywood never planned to forget. She never mentioned it again. But those who knew her swore the shame never left. Only days after the film was rumored to surface, Joan landed a studio contract. The timing was convenient. Her name was changed, her image scrubbed, but the girl in that reel still followed her, silent, wide-eyed, unblinking. And maybe she'd been running long before that. Some biographers believe Joan's obsession with order, her bleach-scrubbed floors, her starched children, her surgical smile, wasn't just about image. It was survival. Allegedly, she suffered abuse at the hands of a stepfather in the back room of an opera house. If true, it wasn't her first performance, just the one she never escaped. Hollywood crowned her a queen, but she never stopped cleaning. Every wrinkle, every headline, every emotion, scrubbed out, repainted, denied. Her home was spotless, her legacy, cracking. And when Mommy Dearest hit bookshelves decades later, the world met a different Joan. Not the monster Christina described, but a woman who'd been polishing a haunted mirror for 50 years. Because for Joan Crawford, perfection wasn't vanity, it was protection. From a past the studios couldn't bury fast enough. The fixer. The man who made pregnancies disappear before the tabloids could. He wasn't a leading man. He didn't have a star on the Walk of Fame. But in 1940s Hollywood, no studio executive held more power behind the scenes than Eddie Mannix, the man you never saw coming and never wanted to owe. Mannix wasn't just MGM's general manager. He was their shield, their cleaner, their so-called fixer. When a scandal threatened to burn the studio to the ground, Mannix swept in like a silent storm, unlisted, uncredited, but utterly undeniable. His specialty? Making the messy vanish, including the kind of pregnancies that would have ended careers before they ever started. Back then, a young starlet's public image was more carefully constructed than the sets they filmed on. A marriage could be arranged, a breakup staged, but an unwed pregnancy? That was a death sentence to box office appeal, to contracts, to everything the studio had invested. So Mannix, with his iron suit and deadpan glare, handled it quietly, discreetly, ruthlessly. The rumors were endless. He'd send actresses away to rest in secluded bungalows. Doctors were called, birth certificates vanished, babies were allegedly placed in other homes or never spoken of again. And if the woman resisted, studio pressure, or Mannix himself, made sure the problem went away. Even A-listers weren't immune. Some of the biggest names in classic cinema are whispered to have crossed Mannix's desk, under a cloak of silence and desperation. But the truth came at a cost, one that couldn't be buried forever. The psychological toll on the women involved was profound. Some never emotionally recovered. Others carried the burden privately until the end of their days. They were groomed to smile on camera while carrying a grief that wasn't allowed to exist. Mannix, for his part, never seemed to flinch. He lived in the shadows of the machine he helped preserve, his hands clean only in appearance. But even he wasn't untouchable. His own marriage was filled with tragedy. His wife's accidental death raised more than a few eyebrows, and when he finally passed, he left behind no memoir, no confession, just a trail of silence wrapped in golden age glamour. In a town built on illusion, Mannix was the illusionist. But while he made problems disappear, the pain he left behind still lingers, just out of frame. Loretta Young, the starlet who adopted her own child. In 1935, beneath the icy air of Alaska's wilderness, Loretta Young was filming The Call of the Wild alongside the dashing Clark Gable. On screen, the chemistry simmered. Off-screen, it sparked something far more lasting and far more dangerous. Young was a devout Catholic, the image of Hollywood virtue. Gable, meanwhile, was married and known for his wandering eye. Their brief affair on location was swept under the rug, until Loretta returned to Los Angeles with more than just film reels. She was pregnant. In an era where an unwed mother could lose everything – career, reputation, livelihood – Loretta had no choice but to vanish. She told the press she was ill. Behind closed doors, she retreated into seclusion, far from the cameras and the gossip columns. There, in secret, she gave birth to a daughter named Judy. But the cover-up didn't end with whispers. It became theater. Months later, Loretta re-emerged into Hollywood society, radiant, graceful, and with an announcement. She had adopted a baby girl. The press applauded her compassion. The lie was complete. Even Judy herself didn't learn the truth until adulthood. The child had Clark's ears, a detail Loretta tried to conceal by pinning her daughter's hair back for publicity photos. But family resemblance couldn't be airbrushed forever. Rumors swirled, and within the industry, the truth was an open secret. Still, Loretta refused to confirm it. Not publicly, not even privately. For years. Why the secrecy? Some say it was fear, others say shame, or perhaps it was the iron grip of a studio system that demanded perfection and punished the human underneath. Whatever the reason, the emotional toll was undeniable. For years, Judy wrestled with a sense of confusion, never knowing why she felt like a secret, or whose secret she really was. Loretta continued her career with poise, collecting awards and accolades. But behind the polished smile was a woman who'd built her legacy on silence. In later years, Loretta finally confessed the truth to Judy. In a hushed, tearful conversation behind closed doors. No press, no cameras, just a mother and daughter, decades late, trying to rewrite the past. Because in old Hollywood, truth wasn't scripted, and sometimes love had to be hidden to survive. Marilyn Monroe, the president's favorite mistake. In May of 1962, under the blinding lights of Madison Square Garden, she stepped onto the stage in a dress so tight it shimmered like liquid glass. "Happy birthday, Mr. President," she purred, and the world held its breath. But behind that breathy voice and that camera-perfect smile was a woman already unraveling. Marilyn Monroe wasn't just the most famous woman in the world. She was the fantasy, the myth maker. But off-screen, she was drowning. 3 failed marriages, studio pressure to remain a bombshell long after the shine had faded, and whispers that she couldn't stay sober plagued her final years. And then came the Kennedys. The rumors started as murmurs, a passing connection here, a private visit there. But when Marilyn sang to JFK on that glittering night, the murmurs became roars. Some claim it wasn't just John. Some say Robert, too. Allegedly, she had fallen for one, or both, and she may have been ready to tell the world. What happened next has fueled conspiracy theories for decades. In August of that same year, just 12 weeks after that infamous birthday song, Marilyn was found unresponsive in her Los Angeles home. Officially, it was ruled an accident, a fatal mix of pills. But unofficially, backlot rumors wouldn't die. Some believe she kept a diary, filled with secrets too dangerous to see daylight. Others say she called a press conference, one that never happened. And then there's the timing. Her phone records vanished. So did parts of her autopsy report. And yet, the studios said nothing. The press? Silent. The Kennedys? Nowhere to be found. She was 36. The woman who played dumb blondes with deadly wit was far smarter than the world gave her credit for. But being smart didn't save her. Being famous didn't either. She died alone in a house paid for by a studio that once worshipped her. and later washed their hands of her. In the end, Marilyn was a woman split in two, the dream America sold, and the real human they discarded. She was used, adored, and ultimately silenced. But her whisper still echoes, not just in that song, but in every starlet who learned that in Hollywood, being wanted and being protected are never the same. Elizabeth Taylor, the violet-eyed widow who took her best friend's husband. In 1958, under the shadow of grief, Elizabeth Taylor did something unforgettable and unforgivable. Just weeks after her third husband, producer Mike Todd, died in a plane crash. She was seen in public, on the arm of his best friend. That friend? Eddie Fisher, who at the time happened to be married to America's sweetheart, Debbie Reynolds. Elizabeth Taylor was no stranger to the spotlight. With eyes the color of stormy violets and a presence that could hush a room, she had become one of the most bankable stars of her generation. But Hollywood didn't just sell her image. It sold the myth of her innocence. That myth shattered when the papers got wind of her affair with Fisher. The backlash was instant. Headlines branded her a homewrecker. Fan clubs disbanded. Some theaters quietly pulled her films. She didn't just lose the public's admiration. She became a cautionary tale. Debbie Reynolds and Elizabeth had been close, neighbors, friends, young mothers in parallel orbits. To many, it wasn't just betrayal. It was sacrilege, but Elizabeth didn't back down. She famously snapped, "You can't steal a man who doesn't want to be stolen." The scandal forced Fisher to divorce Reynolds and marry Taylor in 1959. But the marriage was doomed from the start. Fisher's career never recovered. Taylor, meanwhile, moved on, famously and frequently. She would go on to marry 7 more times, including twice to Richard Burton. But this moment, the affair that made front-page news and split Hollywood in two, was the first time the world saw her as something more than a screen goddess. They saw the fire beneath the glamour, the chaos, the hunger. Elizabeth Taylor didn't crumble under the shame. She wore it like diamonds. Brilliant, heavy, impossible to ignore. But even she couldn't escape the toll. Behind the jewels and perfume campaigns, she battled alleged depression and struggled with her health for years. Public love returned, eventually, but the betrayal lingered. In the end, Taylor lived and lost more than most, and kept moving forward. But that one affair, born in grief and lit by scandal, remains one of old Hollywood's most infamous trespasses. Because when the widow became the thief, the whole world watched. Rock Hudson, the leading man with a hidden life. In the 1950s, Rock Hudson's face was everywhere. Billboards, movie posters, magazine covers. With a jawline carved from marble and a voice that could melt a room, he was the embodiment of American masculinity. Millions of women adored him. Millions of men wanted to be him. But behind the camera, behind the charm, was a secret he couldn't afford to share. Rock Hudson was a studio creation in the truest sense. Universal Pictures molded him, marketed him, and protected him. They arranged his dates, scripted his interviews, and even coordinated his marriage. A carefully staged union with Phyllis Gates, the secretary of his agent. To the world, it was love. In reality, it was camouflage. Rumors circulated quietly around parties, inside dressing rooms, behind closed doors at elite clubs. Hudson, they whispered, was not the man the public thought he was. But no one dared print it, not in that era. Studios had too much money at stake, and tabloids feared lawsuits, so Rock played the part. On screen, he seduced Doris Day and Liz Taylor. Off screen, he lived in fear of exposure. But the double life took its toll. Friends later described him as private to the point of isolation, warm in public, withdrawn in private. He confided in few, trusted even fewer. And as the years passed, the walls around his real identity grew thicker. He allegedly battled deep loneliness, the kind that settles in your bones and makes even a standing ovation feel hollow. Then came 1984. Rock Hudson appeared in public, looking frail, almost unrecognizable. Within months, he became the first major celebrity to reveal he was suffering from a then misunderstood illness. The announcement sent shockwaves through Hollywood. The leading man, the ultimate symbol of strength, was suddenly a face of vulnerability. And with it, the secret he had spent a lifetime hiding was out. Hudson passed away the following year, but in doing so, he became more than a matinee idol. He became a symbol of dignity, of fear, of what it meant to live a truth that the world wasn't ready to accept. He played dozens of roles in his life, but the bravest one? He played without a script. Jean Harlow, the blonde bombshell MGM wouldn't let love. In the early 1930s, Jean Harlow was. Jean's contract with MGM included a strict morality clause. Her sexy image was carefully curated. A single woman, unattainable and untamed. Marriage, especially to a co-star, would ruin the fantasy. So during their affair, to preserve her image and her paycheck, she allegedly checked into a private hospital under a false name, where the story took a sharp, painful turn. Whether she lost the baby naturally or by design remains debated to this day. But one fact is clear. She returned to the set of Saratoga soon after, thinner, paler, and visibly strained. Only weeks later, while still filming, Jean collapsed on set. Doctors initially dismissed it as fatigue, but it was far worse. She had been silently battling kidney failure, the kind of exhaustion that settles in your bones and doesn't let go. Within days, Hollywood's blonde bombshell was gone, dead at 26. Powell never recovered. He reportedly kept her photograph. Ingrid Bergman, the star, the Senate, called a powerful evil. In 1942, she stood beside Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca, radiant and noble, the face of wartime grace. By the decade's end, that same face would be denounced on the floor of the United States Senate. Ingrid Bergman was adored, not just for her beauty, but for the honesty in her performances. She had a rare stillness, a quiet moral weight that made audiences believe in her. Off-screen, she was seen as the very image of decency. But in 1949, she did something that shattered that illusion. She fell in love. The man was Italian director Roberto Rossellini. She was married at the time. So was he. They met while discussing a potential film project, and the connection was instant. What followed wasn't just an affair. It was a bold, public departure from everything America thought a star, especially their star, should be. Bergman became pregnant before either divorce was finalized. The press exploded. The backlash was swift and merciless. Churches condemned her. Theaters boycotted her films. And in a moment that feels almost absurd today, Senator Edwin Johnson of Colorado took to Capitol Hill and declared that Ingrid Bergman had become a powerful influence for evil. She was quietly blacklisted. The woman who had once symbolized virtue was now a cinematic pariah. So she left. Not just the country, but the entire Hollywood system. She stayed in Europe, married Rossellini, and raised their child away from the American press that had once worshipped her. Years passed. The anger cooled. In 1956, Bergman returned to American screens in Anastasia and won her second Academy Award. But even then, the shadows lingered. She had paid a steep price. Her reputation, her custody of her first daughter, and nearly her entire U.S. career. Still, she never apologized for following her heart. Ingrid Bergman's downfall wasn't caused by scandal alone. It was the punishment for being a woman who made her own choices in an era that demanded silence and submission. The irony? Her most condemned role was the one she lived in real life, that of a woman torn between duty and passion. And in the end, she chose passion, and it nearly cost her everything. Robert Mitchum, the cool rebel who got caught in a not-so-cool sting. In 1948, Robert Mitchum wasn't just starring in noir films. He was living one. At the peak of his career, Mitchum's brooding stare and rough charm had already made him a household name. But what happened next could have ended it all. In a sting operation that shocked Hollywood, Mitchum was arrested in a private home raid. accused of smoking something the studio preferred to keep buried. The cops, the cameras, the handcuffs. It played out like a movie. Only this time, Mitchum wasn't the hero. He was the headline. The fallout came fast. Tabloids feasted on it, and MGM panicked behind closed doors. Their rising star, now a convicted man, faced a 60-day jail sentence. For most actors, that would have been the final curtain. But Mitchum didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned into the scandal with a shrug and a smirk, telling reporters it's just like Palm Springs, but without the riffraff. While MGM scrambled to control the damage, Mitchum played the long game. They tried to bury the story, even hiring a fixer to sweep the arrest under the rug. But the public had already made up its mind. To them, Mitchum wasn't a disgrace. He was dangerous, rebellious, and magnetic. Jail didn't ruin him. It mythologized him. Behind the scenes, though, things weren't so effortless. Directors hesitated. Studios grew wary. And Mitchum, always more poet than playboy, found himself cast as the very thing he mocked, the outlaw who couldn't quite behave. He kept working, yes, but the roles hardened. Less romance, more shadows. He'd become the thing he once pretended to be. Years later, when asked about the scandal, Mitchum didn't blame anyone. He didn't whine. He didn't spin. He simply said, "I only made one mistake. I got caught." There's a kind of honesty in that, the kind Hollywood usually edits out. In the end, Robert Mitchum didn't fall from grace. He walked straight through the fire and lit a cigarette on the way out. But the price? A career forever branded by rebellion. He never fully shook the image. He just wore it like a second skin, and somehow that only made him more unforgettable. Clark Gable, the king who hid a crown-sized secret. In 1939, Clark Gable stood on a burning set in Gone with the Wind, adjusted his tie, and delivered a line that would define an era. To the world, he was the king of Hollywood, the masculine ideal, the man who never blinked. But even kings have secrets, and Gable's was the kind that couldn't be written into a script. During the filming of Call of the Wild in 1935, Gable had a brief but intense affair with his co-star, Loretta Young. He was already married. She was unmarried, Catholic, and terrified of scandal. And yet, weeks after the shoot ended, Young discovered she was pregnant. In the 1930s, a single mother, especially one in Hollywood, wasn't just frowned upon, she was finished. Loretta disappeared from the public eye for months. She told the press she was suffering from a mysterious illness. Behind closed doors, she quietly gave birth to a baby girl named Judy. But the most unbelievable part came next. Loretta returned to Hollywood with the child in tow and announced she had adopted the baby from an orphanage. For decades, the truth remained hidden. Even Judy didn't know who her real parents were. But those who saw her, the ears, the jawline, the eyes, knew she looked unmistakably like her father. Like Gable, he never publicly acknowledged the child, not once. Studio handlers, press agents, and legal teams kept the lie alive. For Gable, the fallout never came. His career surged forward. He starred in epic films, married Carole Lombard, served in the war, and cemented his legacy. But behind the fame was a silence that lasted generations. Judy eventually pieced the truth together as an adult. By then, Gable was long gone, having passed in 1960, just weeks after finishing The Misfits. In her memoir, Judy wrote of feeling like a secret the world wasn't supposed to remember. Not a shame, just forgotten. Clark Gable played heroes, men of honor, but his real-life choices didn't always match the silver screen. And maybe that's the story that stings the most, because sometimes the greatest betrayal isn't a grand scandal. It's the quiet decision to leave the truth unspoken. And for one daughter, that silence echoed louder than any applause. Frances Farmer, the star who wouldn't be tamed. In 1937, Frances Farmer glided across the Paramount lot like a woman who knew exactly who she was and didn't care who didn't like it. She was brilliant, uncompromising, and defiant at a time when women in Hollywood were expected to smile and follow orders. She did neither, and for that, the system came for her. Farmer wasn't just another pretty face. She was a classically trained actress with Broadway credentials and a rebellious streak. At the peak of her fame, she starred alongside Cary Grant and Bing Crosby, earning comparisons to Greta Garbo. But Frances had little patience for Hollywood's illusions. She mocked the publicity machine, refused to attend parties, and publicly questioned religion, capitalism, and even the meaning of fame itself. She didn't just bend the rules, she tore them in half. But Hollywood doesn't reward nonconformity. By 1942, her roles dried up, and the tabloids painted her as difficult. Her personal life unraveled in full view. She reportedly struggled with bouts of depression and intense mood swings, and rumors began swirling about her behavior. Erratic appearances, shouting matches with producers, even being accused of misconduct on set. Then came the arrest. A headline-grabbing confrontation with a hairdresser led to a courtroom spectacle. She was declared mentally unfit and sent to a psychiatric institution, one of many over the next several years. What happened behind those locked doors remains the subject of endless speculation. Whispers of invasive procedures, forced treatments, and long stints in padded rooms haunt her legacy to this day. By the 1950s, Frances emerged, older, quieter, and nearly unrecognizable from the firebrand she once was. She attempted a brief comeback, appearing in a handful of TV roles and hosting a local talk show. But the industry that broke her had no interest in helping her rebuild. She died in 1970, at just 56, her story mostly erased, until her name was revived as a tragic cautionary tale of what happens when Hollywood can't control you. Frances Farmer didn't fall from grace. She was pushed, punished for having a mind that couldn't be molded. And though they tried to silence her, the echo of her defiance still lingers, just loud enough to remind us what it cost to speak up. Lana Turner, the star, whose daughter took the fall. In 1958, Lana Turner's life turned from Technicolor to tabloid overnight. One moment, she was America's favorite blonde, a vision draped in mink and diamonds. The next, her name was splashed across headlines beside a word Hollywood rarely paired with glamour: murder. Lana had lived through scandal before. Discovered at a soda fountain at 16, she rocketed to fame as the quintessential screen siren. Seductive, untouchable, and always perfectly lit. But behind the fantasy was a pattern of volatile romances, broken engagements, and painful secrets. None more dangerous than Johnny Stompanato. Stompanato wasn't a producer or actor. He was, as the papers delicately put it, a man with connections. Their relationship was stormy from the start, marked by jealous fights and whispered threats. Friends said Lana tried to leave him more than once, but every time she did, he came back louder and darker. On April 4th, 1958, the screaming inside Lana's Beverly Hills home stopped with a single sound: the crack of a knife hitting flesh. Her daughter, Cheryl Crane, just 14 years old, was found clutching the weapon. She told police she heard Johnny threaten to hurt her mother and acted in fear. A juvenile court later ruled it justifiable. No charges were filed, but the stain was permanent. For Lana, the fallout was paradoxical. Public sympathy surged, a mother protecting her daughter, a daughter protecting her mother. But not everyone bought the story. Rumors swirled that Lana had been the one to strike the fatal blow, and that Cheryl took the blame. Neither woman ever changed their account. The studio spun the tragedy into a tale of maternal devotion, and Lana's career, shockingly, didn't die. In fact, she landed one of her most famous roles just a year later in Imitation of Life, playing a mother whose ambition comes at a cost. The lines blurred between fiction and reality, and maybe that's what kept the audience watching. But the glamour never fully returned. Behind every red carpet smile was a shadow of that night, and a daughter who carried more than her share. Lana Turner played femme fatales for decades, But the real drama wasn't on the screen. It was in a hallway, behind a closed door, where fame met fear, and a child tried to be a shield. Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, Hollywood's pettiest war. In 1962, two aging legends sat across from each other on the set of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. One gripping a script, the other gripping a grudge. The camera rolled, but what played out behind the scenes was more vicious than anything on screen. Bette Davis and Joan Crawford weren't just actresses. They were empires, built on ambition, vanity, and raw talent. And they hated each other with a precision usually reserved for chess matches and war generals. Their rivalry spanned decades, but it wasn't just about roles or awards. It was personal, deeply, deliberately personal. The bad blood started in the 1930s. Joan was the reigning glamour queen at MGM. All furs, diamonds, and press-ready poses. Bette, the underdog at Warner Brothers, was known for her sharp tongue and refusal to play nice. When Bette fell in love with actor Franchot Tone on a film set, Joan married him, seemingly just to prove she could. That wound never healed. Years later, when both women's careers had cooled, Baby Jane was supposed to be a comeback. Instead, it became a battleground. Bette had the lead role, and she relished every minute of it. Joan seethed from the sidelines until Oscar season gave her the perfect revenge. Bette was nominated for Best Actress. Joan wasn't. But instead of sitting quietly, Crawford offered to accept the award on behalf of any nominee who couldn't attend. When Anne Bancroft won and didn't show, Joan glided onto the stage, collected the statue, and posed for photos like it was hers. Bette, watching from the wings, was livid. Their feud didn't just burn, it smoldered for years. They insulted each other in interviews, undermined each other's roles, and whispered poison into every microphone that would listen. Hollywood had seen bigger scandals, but none quite so petty or so deliciously public. And yet, beneath all the barbs was something sadder. Two women shaped by a system that pitted them against each other, forced to claw for scraps of power in an industry that gave them everything. Then, slowly, took it back. They never made peace. But maybe that's the point. Because in a town built on illusions, Bette and Joan gave us something rare. A feud so real, it outlasted the fame. Barbara Payton, from Hollywood's next big thing to its saddest fall from grace. In 1951, Barbara Payton was the blonde bombshell every producer wanted, and every tabloid was waiting to destroy. She had the look, the sultry eyes, the voice that could melt a room. Hollywood had crowned her the next big thing, but behind the camera flashes, her life was spiraling faster than anyone could control. And when she fell, she didn't just stumble. She collapsed in front of the entire world. It started with a love triangle that turned violent. Payton was engaged to rising star Franchot Tone, until he found out she'd also been involved with rugged actor Tom Neal. The confrontation was brutal. Neal beat Tone so badly, he was hospitalized with a shattered cheekbone and broken nose. Barbara? She was caught in the middle, accused of fanning the flames, then ditching them both for the headlines. The scandal torched her career overnight. Studios distanced themselves. Scripts dried up, and Payton, once hailed as the poor man's Lana Turner, found herself doing cheap stage shows in seedy bars just to pay the bills. The glamour had curdled, and the press was merciless. But the story didn't stop at heartbreak. As the offers vanished, rumors swirled that Barbara had turned to selling herself just to survive. Mugshots replaced headshots. She was arrested more than once, often looking unrecognizable, bruised, disheveled, and far from the starlet Hollywood had once embraced. In her own words, she was a sorry mess of a woman, battling personal demons no screenwriter could clean up. What made it all so gutting was that Barbara never stopped trying. She wrote a raw memoir titled, I Am Not Ashamed, and she meant every word. It wasn't a redemption arc, it was a confession. a final attempt to be seen as something more than a cautionary tale. Barbara Payton died at just 39, penniless and alone in a crumbling LA apartment. Her name faded from marquees, but never from the darker corners of Hollywood lore, because hers wasn't just a fall from grace, it was a slow-motion tragedy, unraveling in plain sight. And through it all, one question lingered like smoke after a house fire. How did no one stop it? In the end, Barbara wasn't destroyed by scandal. She was erased by a system that only loved women when they smiled on cue. Jeanette MacDonald, the voice MGM tried to silence. In 1935, Jeanette MacDonald had it all: operatic grace, technicolor beauty, and a voice that soared above the noise of the Great Depression. To audiences, she was the perfect soprano princess. But behind the Hollywood fantasy was a love story the studio worked tirelessly to erase, even if it meant threatening her life. MacDonald's on-screen chemistry with baritone Nelson Eddy wasn't just acting. Off-screen, they were deeply in love. Two artists caught in a whirlwind that felt bigger than the movies themselves. But love, in the studio system, had rules, and breaking them came with a price. At the time, both MacDonald and Eddy were MGM's golden couple, but only as long as they stayed apart. Louis B. Mayer, the infamous head of the studio, feared a real-life romance would ruin their bankable mystique. So when Jeanette became pregnant, the studio intervened. According to multiple accounts, Mayer issued a direct ultimatum. If she didn't quietly end the pregnancy, both she and Eddy would be blacklisted. Their careers, their livelihoods, would be over. Faced with impossible pressure, Jeanette allegedly agreed to the procedure, but in a tragic twist, she miscarried shortly after. Mayer assumed his demands had been followed. Eddy, heartbroken and confused, assumed she'd betrayed their future. The fallout was emotional devastation. Nelson ended the relationship, and Mayer doubled down, casting them together in film after film, forcing them to perform duets with broken hearts. On set, the music soared, but the silence between takes was thunderous. Their forced separation was no secret within Hollywood circles. And though Jeanette eventually married Gene Raymond, many claimed the union was one of convenience, not passion. Letters between Jeanette and Nelson, revealed years later, confirmed that the love never really faded. It just went underground. Jeanette MacDonald died in 1965, her public image still pristine, but behind the sequins and operatic applause was a woman who paid dearly to protect the man she loved, and a career that demanded silence when her heart wanted to sing. In the end, her voice never cracked on stage, but in private, it broke over and over again. Because in old Hollywood, some love stories weren't scripted, and those were the ones they buried deepest. Ramon Novarro, the Latin lover with a secret he couldn't outrun. In the 1920s, when silent films spoke louder than words, Ramon Novarro didn't need dialogue to seduce the world. With brooding eyes and matinee idol charm, he was Hollywood's heir to Rudolph Valentino, a romantic fantasy for millions. But behind the heartthrob image was a quiet man. Trapped by secrets the studio system refused to let him share. Novarro's rise was meteoric. His role in Ben-Hur made him a global icon, and, for a time, he was one of the highest-paid stars in the industry. But unlike his on-screen personas, lovers, warriors, saints, Ramon was forced to live his real life in shadows. Whispers followed him from party to party, studio to studio. Those who worked closely with him knew the truth. Novarro was a man who could never live fully in the light. In an era when being different meant losing everything, he lived with constant fear. MGM protected his image with surgical precision, arranging public dates, managing his appearances, and keeping rumors buried. But the stress chipped away at him. Over time, he allegedly battled personal demons, struggling to maintain the polished persona that had made him famous. His career began to fade. And then, decades after his fame had dimmed, came the tragedy that made headlines. In 1968, Ramon Novarro was found dead in his Los Angeles home, the victim of a violent robbery gone horribly wrong. Two brothers had entered his house looking for money they believed was hidden there. What happened next was brutal and senseless. The press fixated on lurid details, speculating wildly about his private life. For the first time, the public saw not the idol, but the vulnerable man he had always been forced to conceal. Hollywood, predictably, looked away. Ramon's story is a painful reminder of what the Golden Age took from those who didn't fit the mold. He gave the screen elegance, depth, and yearning, and in return was forced to mask the most human parts of himself. The final chapter of his life was not the ending he deserved, but it was the one Hollywood wrote when the cameras stopped rolling. Because for Ramon Novarro, the real drama was never on film. It was in the silence between roles, in a home too quiet, with a truth no studio ever wanted spoken aloud. Natalie Wood, the girl who feared the water and vanished beneath it. In 1981, the waves off Catalina Island were calm. Too calm, some would later say, as if the sea itself had secrets to keep. And on that still November night, it took one. Natalie Wood had been a star since she was a child. By the time she filmed Rebel Without a Cause, she wasn't just America's sweetheart, she was its fragile reflection. Audiences watched her grow up on screen, the tender ingenue, the conflicted romantic, the woman who always seemed caught between safety and chaos. And off-screen, that tension followed her. Natalie's personal life played out like a studio drama, complete with a marriage to Robert Wagner that the public couldn't stop watching. They divorced, then, in a twist worthy of a tabloid headline, remarried. But under the surface, their second act was fraught. Natalie was said to be haunted by the fear of deep water since childhood. She'd reportedly confessed it to friends, even to interviewers. So when news broke that she had fallen from a yacht in the dead of night, under mysterious circumstances, the world didn't buy the official story. It felt too poetic, too cruel. She had been aboard the Splendor with Wagner, actor Christopher Walken, and the yacht's captain. Tensions flared, voices were allegedly raised, and by morning, Natalie's body was found floating in a nightgown. The explanations that followed were vague, conflicting. Some said she slipped trying to secure a dinghy. Others weren't so sure. The press circled like sharks. So did the public. But Hollywood went quiet, too quiet. The case was closed, reopened, then reclassified as suspicious. Rumors still swirl to this day about jealousy, about alcohol, about what might have happened when the cameras weren't rolling and the starlight faded. Her death didn't just leave questions, it left a chill, because Natalie Wood had spent her life portraying women struggling to be heard, to be seen for who they truly were. And in the end, her final moments, like so much of her life, were lost in shadows and whispers. For a girl who feared the water, it's a bitter, biting irony. The sea took her quietly, but the silence it left behind still echoes louder than any closing line she ever spoke. Clara Bow, Hollywood's original It Girl, or its darkest rumor magnet. In the silent film era, Clara Bow didn't just arrive, she exploded. With wild red hair and untamed eyes, she became the face of the Roaring Twenties and the symbol of a generation that refused to behave. But behind her dizzying rise was a whisper campaign that never stopped growing. She was dubbed the It Girl, not just for her looks, but for a raw magnetism that couldn't be taught. Men adored her, women envied her, and studios cashed in. But as quickly as fame lifted her, the weight of relentless gossip began to pull her under. Clara wasn't a polished studio puppet. She was loud, unfiltered, and proudly working class. She didn't care for the social games of Hollywood's elite, and that made her dangerous. Reporters branded her wild. Columnists clutched their pearls. But the real damage came when former staff, disgruntled, fired, or paid off, began leaking grotesque claims. Alleged affairs, bizarre parties, shocking behaviors, most of it unverified. much of it likely false. But none of it mattered. The public devoured the scandal, and the press, smelling blood, turned her into a tabloid punching bag. One particularly venomous article, now widely discredited, accused her of everything short of treason. Studios panicked. Clara was hauled into court over a separate legal issue involving a former employee. Though she was cleared, the reputational damage had been done. She unraveled in front of the world, not because of what she did, but because of what people believed she had done. She tried to recover, married actor Rex Bell, moved to a ranch, retreated from the spotlight. But even in exile, her past clung to her like static. She allegedly battled mental health struggles and eventually withdrew completely from public life. From box office gold to recluse, all in less than a decade. Looking back, it's hard to separate the real Clara from the fiction written about her. Was she truly reckless? Or just too modern for her time? In many ways, she was the prototype for every woman in Hollywood who dared to live on her own terms and got punished for it. Clara Bow lit the screen on fire, but behind the glow was a woman trying to survive a spotlight that never blinked. In what they never said. If these stories moved you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe. There's more beneath the surface, and we're not done digging.